So let's start with our focus statement this morning and help us all focus. So, especially me. Here we go. We embolden people to live their highest potential through the transformative power of love. Oh, yes, we do. Thank you. Yeah, so this year here at Centers for Spiritual Living, we're working with the theme of spirituality in action. And we're working with that all year long and worldwide. And the theme for this particular month in the series of Spirituality in Action, then we have mini-series and then little dramas, and we have, the theme we're working with this month is respecting other peoples and other nations, or respecting other nations and peoples, however we want to say that. It's there on page 18 of your Connect magazine, and you can see all of the 10 prophetic justice principles from Dr. James Forbes, who wrote the prophetic justice principles, and it's right there for you to refer to and to reference. So today I wanted to focus our time together on the word respect, the value of respect. And of course, you know, when you see the word, you can't help but think of Aretha, so then I had to put the periods in between because, you know, right? Because that's just the way it is. It's either Aretha's Respect, R.E.S.P.E.C.T, I almost didn't spell it right, or, you know, Madonna's Respect Yourself. So I chose to go with R.E.S.P.E.C.T, but Respect Yourself also works because there's only one self, right? Oh, one and all. All right. So when we are looking at the word respect, and we want to approach this when we're thinking about respecting other countries or other nations and other peoples, and respecting each other, respecting one another, respecting life. We had a really great discussion this morning at the morning table as to what respect looks like, what respect feels like, how we each define respect. And I love that the morning table comes together and shares with one another these ideas, and it's so enlivening and enriching. And I'm like, wow, okay, so the talk that I prepared, they just kind of like did the talk that I prepared, so now what do we do? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some of the stuff that we discussed in the morning table that was already part of the talk anyway, and you know, we'll expand from there and see how that unfolds and plays out, shall we? All right, so when we look at respect, one of my first minister, Reverend Doug Fogelsong, spoke on this topic actually on Wednesday, so I was like, oh, I want to see what he had to say, right? Because I knew that I was preparing this as well. And so when he spoke about respect the other day, he took it from the very high ideal spiritual principle of when we recognize everyone's spiritual perfection, or recognizing everyone's spiritual perfection enables complete transformation. Isn't that nice? Yeah, he's only been doing this for 25, 30 years, so I mean, you know, but I like it. Respecting everyone's spiritual perfection enables complete transformation. I like that. I like that a lot, because what he's really talking about there is he's really talking about our oneness, right? That when we look at each other, when we view each other, and we see each other with the eyes of spiritual perfection, then it is easy to transform. When we recognize the divine within each other, then we can have the complete transformation, if you will, of our own ideas or our society, that we can lift and transform the world when we're seeing rightly, seeing through the eyes of the divine, and seeing the divine in everyone and in everything, and recognizing that spiritual perfection. And so when we come to meet one another in a place of respect, then what we're doing there and what we teach here and affirm here is that we are seeing the divine, that it is the divine meeting the divine. It is, I am seeing your highest self, and hopefully you're seeing my highest self when we come into contact with one another. If we are respecting each other, we are coming together on that divine plane, if you will. Like Rumi says, out beyond wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, and I'll meet you there, right? So that we're meeting on this equal place. And so from that place, we meet with a feeling of compassion, and we meet with a feeling of consideration, and we meet with a feeling of love and a feeling of honoring one another. So I wholeheartedly subscribe to that. That respect very well means that we are called to see the highest potential in one another, right? That's what we are here about, to live their highest potential, right? We embolden people to live their highest potential. So that is very right, and that is very true, and it resonates. And sometimes, though, we can just stick to that. And we can get caught in a little fun thing called spiritual bypass, right? Where what I mean by spiritual bypass is I'm so busy seeing, the God in you. I'm so busy seeing the divine in you, and I am honoring the divine in you, and I am like really focused on seeing the divine in you, that I am going to ignore your lived experiences. I'm going to ignore what may be going on in your life at the moment. I'm going to put it aside. I'm going to try not to see that because I'm really busy trying to focus on the perfection in you. And even though you are pushing every last button and stomping on every last nerve, I'm going to try to see the perfection in you, right? Rather than honoring simply what is. So another way of looking at respect is we can't really respect something if we don't know it and honor it as it is. To first respect something, we must know something, we must know it, and we must honor it just as it is, without really needing to change it, without really needing to do anything else about it, without needing to make it wrong or make it right, but simply being present with what is and honoring it. Not trying to discount it, not trying not to see it, not trying to do anything about it, but simply being present with it. Because sometimes what I find is that we want to jump to, and I think it's great, but there's this kind of back and forth that I find with our movement is that, we want to jump to the good right away, which I think is really good, that we want to envision a world that works for everyone, and we need to be doing that. We need to be lifting that. We need to be holding that high, and that really does need to be the center of our attention. But when we are so focused on that we're missing the lived experience of others or what is going on in the world at large, then what I sometimes feel we could come across, or we could come off as being aloof, arrogant, out of touch, not in tune, uncaring, unfriendly, unwhatever, because all we're doing is giving what feels to maybe some is spiritual platitudes when we're speaking spiritual truth. So I think there's this balance that has to happen between being able to walk in the world and see what's going on in the world, but not get caught in the swirl of the world. And it's about honoring what's happening and honoring folks where we see them and where we meet them, and honoring that and being able to really see that and being able to say, hey, because that's where the compassion and the consideration comes in. When I see you, when I really see you, and I listen to you, and I honor your experience, and I honor where you're at, there is a validation there. There is a, hey, this is a human being. This is a spiritual being. This is a human being. This is somebody that I am having a connection with, that I can have a connection with, because you know what? I see you. I see your experience. I see your pain. I see your culture. I see your traditions. I see the way you think. I see your possibilities. I see your potentialities. I see your positions. Because when we interact with each other, when we think of it from a cultural perspective, we all are multicultural. Let me say that again. We are all multicultural. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that when I say we're all multicultural? Each one of us is multicultural. Each one of us has our own ethnic heritage. Each one of us has our own gender, perhaps. Well, not perhaps. We each have our own gender. How you identify. We each have however old we are, right? We each have whatever profession we are in. We each may have our own eating habits. We all live in Riverside, in the inland valleys. Well, the culture of Riverside is very different than the culture of San Bernardino. And the culture of the Inland Empire is very different than the culture of Orange County. And the culture of this whole Southern California is very different than the culture of Northern California, right? So there are also regional differences. There's educational differences. There is a wide variety of differences. And as you are walking in the world, you are participating continuously in multicultures because you yourself are multicultural. You yourself operate in all these different worlds and all these different realms. And so when we bring our multicultural self to anywhere we go, then we bump up into other people's multicultural selves, and then we find common ground perhaps, and then we also observe differences. And what looks like respect in one cultural purview, or in my cultural purview, or in my life experience purview, might look different than what's respectful or what could be considered respect in yours. Yes? Right? Because each of these little microcultures, if you will, all have norms, all have traditions, all have their own languages too, right? How many of you know what a soap note is? 2, right? Or 3, 4, soap notes, right? It's a medical term that as a massage therapist or licensed clinical social worker or others in the medical profession, we use these terms easily, effortlessly, when we understand what we're talking about. And if we're all talking about soap notes and charting and everything, and everybody else is like, what are you talking about, right? Then there's a feeling of inclusion and exclusion, right? There's a language that's there. There's an understanding that's there that might not be elsewhere, right? So there's an opportunity. And so if you think of your own profession or your own walk of life, you'll see that you've got lingo too. Like the band and the musicians speak a whole nother language that I do not understand. I catch bits and phrases, right? Like it's kind of like I know how to say hello in Chinese, right? It's, like when I'm hearing them talk, raise it up a step or bring it down a step or, blah, 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 blah. I'm just like, okay, sure. Right? That there's all these different cultures that we move in. And what may be respectful in some cultures, like, I'm going to out myself. So, we had a wonderful soloist last year, Kristen, right? And she was beautiful. And when I got up, I acknowledged Kristen. I said, Kristen, that was amazing. Thank you so much. And Sean was her accompanist, right? But I said, thank you, Kristen. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Everybody, yay, right? And then she went and she sat down. I didn't say anything about Sean. See, like some of y'all are like, ooh, he didn't say anything about Sean. And some of you are like, so? What, you didn't say anything about Sean. Well, in that culture, in this music culture over here, Sean as the accompanist was just as important, if not more important perhaps, than the soloist. Because of the way Sean was able to support her and follow her and lift her and make the whole experience greater, right? But I was just like, thanks, Kristen. Totally clueless that, I may have just disrespected Sean or people in the music culture that would have caught that, right? My own unconscious, ignorance of a culture. And my beloved Casey came and said, you really should have thanked Sean. And I'm like, why? It's his job. He plays the piano. He accompanies her. She's the soloist, right? I was like, why? And then it was an opportunity to sit with Casey and sit with Wayne and sit with Sean and learn more about what it means to be an accompanist rather than a pianist. And to learn more about what the culture is like of what is respectful in that particular culture. And how my ignorance was disrespectful. Does that make sense? I mean, it's an easy example, and it's a little bit lighthearted example, except for maybe Sean and Casey and Wayne and the rest of the band. But it's a little bit more of a lighthearted example. But we can apply this to a larger perspective, to a larger cultural perspective, right? So when we are looking to respect one another, we have the opportunity to open our hearts and open our minds. And what do we say here at Riverside? That we take how much responsibility? 100%. Oh, you guys are so good. That we take 100% responsibility for our lives, right? And we take 100% responsibility for our actions, and we take 100% responsibility for our own growth and for our own development. Remember, it's about emboldening people to live their highest potential. It's not, we're going to live your highest potential for you, right? So it's about taking responsibility. So when I looked at respect again, then looking at the R.E.S.P.E.C.T, we have the opportunity to take 100% responsibility for educating ourselves about people, expressions, expectations, experiences. There's all kinds of E words, right? About taking responsibility for educating ourselves for people, positions, expectations, experiences, cultures, and traditions. But it's really about taking respect, to respect someone else, to respect other nations and other countries and other peoples, other ideas. We really have to take responsibility for ourselves and take responsibility for our own education. They offered me a gift, and I took it. And then I was able to take that and then run with that and continue to educate myself about the world in which they operate and the culture in which they operate, so that I myself become more aware, so that I myself gain more cultural competence, and so that I myself can gain more cultural fluency that allows me to move and interact with this world in a more appropriate way, in a more respectful way. And it then brings us together, it builds a bridge, it closes a gap, and while it's also closing a gap, it's expanding my world. Yes? It's expanding my own understanding. It's expanding my own idea of what the divine looks like and how the divine shows up and how the divine manifests. Because that's really what the opportunity is here, is when we look at other cultures or other peoples, it's an opportunity to educate ourselves and to expand our own understanding and our own experience of the divine. Because if we are all the divine made manifest, and we are all individualized expressions of the divine, then when we interact with one another, when we interact with people who have different viewpoints, or we interact with people who have different cultural perspectives, or we interact with people who have different traditions, or different positions, different politics, what have you, when we interact, and we do so from a place of curiosity, a place of love, and a place of openness, and a place of willingness, then what happens is we then begin to, one, build those bridges, build those connections, but then we also have an expanded worldview. We continue to expand our ideas of what's possible and how life unfolds and how life plays out. And then it gives us more opportunity to express compassion and consideration for one another. Would you agree? When I was little, I began learning Spanish just a little bit. Just a little bit. Started all the way back in preschool. I knew how to count to 20 by the end of preschool. And there my Spanish stayed for a long time. And then my grandparents moved to Southern California, and we spent every summer with my grandparents. And we would go shopping, and we would hear Spanish around us in Gemco, if people remember Gemco, right? Yeah. Yeah. See, and there's another cultural reference, right? If you didn't grow up in Southern California, you have no idea what Gemco is, right? And a certain age, yeah. There you go, and a certain age. Right? So it was a membership store that had everything, but groceries and all kinds of stuff. But, I would hear Spanish being spoken. I was like, I would really like to know what they're saying. Not because I'm Snoopy, but because it's like, well, I can be. But because it's like, there's this whole other world where this is possible and people are communicating in this way. How awesome is this, right? And so then I began studying Spanish. And then my world opened up as to another culture, and another way of expressing, and another way of sharing, and another way of seeing, and another way of interacting with the divine. So Spanish was the first language, and then I studied Japanese. Then I studied German, and then I studied Japanese. And with each one, you don't just study the language, but the culture comes in too. And you begin to learn the culture and appreciate the culture. And then having lived abroad for 6.5 years, really begin to see and appreciate a different culture, having lived in Japan for 6.5 years. And not only do I see the world a different way, but then I was able to turn and look at the United States in a different way. And I was able to see a different perspective of the U.S., especially the continental United States, right? And continues to expand because of a simple curiosity. The thing that has always driven me is getting to know people, getting to understand people, getting to have the opportunity to interact with people so that I might have a better understanding of the world and so that I might have a better understanding of myself, right? That's one of the main drivers for learning about and discovering other cultures and other peoples. Because if everybody's a reflection of yourself, everybody's a reflection of your own ideas, your own thoughts, if everybody is a mirror for us to look into and to grow with and to grow from, then wow, I want my mirror to be as big and as expansive as possible, so that I can really see, I can really appreciate, I can really deepen. And so it's very exciting to do this kind of work, to expand and broaden our horizons. But it also requires a deep respect. so that when we are encountering other cultures, that we appreciate other cultures. We don't appropriate other cultures. Yes. That when we are encountering other cultures, that we learn to appreciate other cultures without appropriating other cultures. Crickets. So, cultural appropriation often happens around holidays. That's one of the easiest places to see it. Cinco de Mayo. Total cultural appropriation. Small, little, minor skirmish in one very small town in Mexico that gets a little bit of recognition in the town. Somehow became, in the United States, fiesta, margaritas, sombreros, Mexican food, cerveza, right? That's taking culture, making and appropriating it, making it ours, and then making it something altogether different, totally ignoring the culture that it came from. Luau parties. Hula, I'm doing the hula, right? No. Not at all. Right? Appropriating cultural dress, appropriating jewelry, appropriating songs, appropriating music, appropriating ideas, and then making them fit into our version or our idea of what they should be. And by our, let's be really real. White people, come on. Okay. Yeah. White bread, yeah, there you go. So to interact and to be part of and to encounter other cultures, the opportunity is to appreciate without taking over, or to appreciate without taking and making it different, and taking and stripping away all of the cultural history, all of the language, all of the ideas that brought forth that cultural tradition. And we have a tendency to want to do that in our spiritual communities too, right? Especially in our new thought communities, sometimes we want to do that when we look at we love and almost venerate Eastern traditions because we have a tendency to live in we live in a culture that it was very much influenced by Jewish tradition and Christian tradition. And so sometimes when we come into centers like Centers for Spiritual Living, where, yes, we honor our Christian and our Jewish traditions, but we also honor other worlds' religion and other worlds' traditions, sometimes we go a little too far and begin to adopt these ideas, begin to adopt these practices, and begin to make them our own. And somehow we're more spiritually enlightened because of that. Right? I think of the kirtan experience, and it's not all kirtan, but a kirtan experience when done by folks who practice Hinduism and practice Buddhism and are from India, and they do the call and the response. And we're invited into this call and response, and it is people for whom this is their culture and they're choosing to share it, and we participate. That's one thing. I'm all for that. But when we have spiritual people for whom that is not their tradition, for whom that is not their culture, then with their white dreadlocks, dancing fluidly, then the sacredness of the kirtan experience, the sacredness of that experience is lost. It's been appropriated by something or someone else to fit into, because this someone else doesn't necessarily fit into or doesn't feel an affinity for their own culture, perhaps. Right? So we have to be very careful and very mindful of how we interact and how we associate and how we integrate, if you will, into culture, and how we interact with cultures, so that we are not appropriating, but we are appreciating. Yeah? Makes sense? Because if we're going to respect one another, then we have to be able to see one another, and we have to be able to appreciate one another, and it's up to us to do our education, to learn what is respectful, what is appropriate, what is right, true, and correct, and honor that which is without trying to take it, without trying to dominate it, without trying to make it our own. And when we do that, then we're back to the very beginning of recognizing everyone's spiritual perfection. And in doing so, that enables us to have a complete transformation. So this week, I invite you to really look at or engage with somebody who might be somewhat different from you. And to do so from a very curious way. Not curious like, ooh, tell me all about yourself, right? To do so by opening our hearts and opening our minds and broadening to an idea of, what's here? How can we build relationship? What is our common ground? Where do we meet out in that field beyond any idea of right doing and wrong doing? Where do we meet? Where do we share? Where do we come together? And how may I honor you without expecting anything in return? How may I extend compassion? How may I extend courteousness? How may I extend consideration? Are you willing to do that this week? Because in so doing, we then begin to create a world that works for everyone and all of creation, which is our vision here at Centers for Spiritual Living. So go forth this day in respect for each other, in respect for the world, and in respect for yourself. And Jubel has a song about it. And as they're coming up, I invite all the practitioners to please stand and surround the sanctuary. And I invite our core council members to also stand and surround the sanctuary. Everybody's getting into position. This is good. All right, so let's just come together in consciousness, shall we? If it's comfortable for you to do so, I invite you to close your eyes. These practitioners and the core council are in prayer for this beloved community every day. If you do have a prayer request, we invite you to fill out the prayer request form in the back of your seat pocket there and deposit it in the prayer request box out in the lobby. You can also send your prayer requests via email. You can also do it online and on our Facebook page, as well as our website. And then you can, of course, come and receive prayer here at the front of the sanctuary after service. So I recognize that there's just this one life, this one infinite, eternal love that is expressing through and as all of creation, that brought forth all of creation in an ever-expanding, ever-widening, ever-growing idea of itself. That All of life, all of creation began in the mind of the One. And it continues to evolve and unfold as that One. So I recognize that all of life, all of creation is a divine expression, emanation, and impartation of this one life, of this one love, of this one infinite eternal beingness. That right where I am, that power and presence is, that it is the who of who I am, and it is the who of who each one is. That there is a spiritual truth that is at the center of each living being. And that spiritual truth is that it is the divine made manifest. It is the one life in full, glorious, magnificent expression. From the single-celled animals and plants all the way up to the most complex beings, all the way up to infinite and eternal expansion of the universe itself. All of this is an expression of one life. And so I speak my word here and now, recognizing that each one is a spiritual perfection. And it is through this recognition that a complete transformation happens in our own individualized minds, that we bring ourselves back into alignment with that high spiritual truth of oneness. And I know that oneness does not mean sameness, that unity does not mean uniformity, but it is simply that which already is, that expresses so magnificently and so beautifully through each life. And I appreciate those differences. I appreciate the diversity with which there is this wonderful, beautiful expression. Because in so doing, in seeing it and recognizing it, then I see and recognize the beauty in a more expansive and expanded way. And I also then recognize and understand the beauty and the perfection that I am in a deeper and greater way. Because I am one with that. I am that I am. And so I simply give thanks for it. I give thanks for the divine unfoldment. I give thanks for the perfection of the universe. I give thanks for the willingness of each one here present this day to go forth from this moment doing the work of creating a world that works for everyone and all of creation. Doing the work of respect. Doing the work of education. Doing the work of understanding. I give thanks for it. And I release this word into the law, knowing that it is done. I simply let it be so. And so it is.
So it is.